Welcome to the Motherhood Uncut Podcast. Deb Rubin and I, Kate Kripke, started this podcast so that we could bring to the table all things that no one wants to talk about in motherhood. Together, both psychotherapists and mothers of teenage daughters, we spent a lot of time, just the two of us, talking about all the stuff that actually shows up behind the scenes in motherhood. And we decided it was time that we all joined this conversation together. So if you are a mom feeling alone, if you're a mom feeling like you could use more information, if you're a mom looking to laugh about the things that are so ridiculous about this job, and quite frankly, if you're a mom needing to cry about the things that are more vulnerable and tenuous and heartbreaking, we've got you. Pull up a chair, put in your earbuds, grab a cup of coffee, grab a glass of wine, whatever you need. Sit down and mother with us. Our conversations are going to be filled with laughter, probably some tears, hopefully some eye-opening insights. And between our conversations and the folks that we interview to help us learn a little bit more and grow a little bit more together, we're going to create a system of mothering that helps us all feel a little bit less alone. Thank you for being here. Let us know what you think. We've got you.
Hey everyone, this is Deb. This week, Kate and I had such an amazing opportunity to interview Ana Tajder. She is a mother, a podcaster, an author, a deep wisdom seeker, and we actually just dove in so hard with this woman. She has her own podcast called Thank You Mama. And we really wanted to bring her onto our podcast to start to expand our wings to moms around the world. It's a huge mission for us to really hear the voices of all women, and she started to bring that to life. So sit back and enjoy the show. We absolutely loved her, and I'm quite certain you will too. Thanks for listening.
Hey listeners, it's Kate. I want to invite you to come on over and find me on Instagram at Kate Kripke, KateKripke, for daily doses of inspiration, but also really useful strategies and tips and things to think about for those of you who are wanting to lean into more emotional and mental well-being in motherhood. Come on over, follow me. Have a discussion with me. Let me know who you are, introduce yourself, and I'm always available to answer questions. I hope to see you there.
Hey everyone, this is Deb. As many of you know by now, I have a huge passion for self-discovery and growth. I just adore helping people find their way back to their intuition and increasing their confidence, especially when it comes to connection. I'm learning and relearning all the time that when we expand our connection with ourselves, we deeply learn how to connect with our children. So my groups, the Mother-Daughter Journey, that is what they're all about. We're learning how to stay steady and how to help our girls feel steady when they are going through such a turbulent transition of adolescence. I'll be launching a bunch of new stuff in the fall, so if you're not on my newsletter yet, you can do so at motherdaughterjourney.co. Sign up there and you'll stay informed and just know what's going on in my world. I cannot wait to work with you, and cheers to being a mom, being human, being messy. Have a great summer.
Hey, Kate. We're podcasting.
Happy podcast day.
Happy podcast day.
So one thing that we talk about often is, well, first is the power of mothers. I mean, that's our whole podcast, right? It's like loving on the deep wisdom of mothers.
Yes.
And one of our biggest themes is how we're more alike than we're different.
Yes.
And how to celebrate the differences and learn from each other all the time. And so we have a really amazing guest with us today.
We do. I actually think she's the guest that is living the farthest away from us yet in this podcast.
I think so too. We have Ana Tajder here, and she's in Austria right now. And Ana's going to tell us all about her work, but she started a podcast called Thank You Mama, and it is a global platform that really brings out all the voices of all different women with all different walks of life. She is so inspiring and so incredible, and I'm so excited to talk to her today because she's going to share with us things she's learned, lessons she's learned from women sharing their stories.
You know what else I love about you, Ana, and your platform, and we'll move over to you in a moment, is that Ana really brings to this table this idea of what we learn from our mothers, right? And how, how sometimes we learn things that are really important and we want to carry forward in our lives. And sometimes I imagine, Ana, you have stories about this too, that we learn things from our mothers that we'd rather tuck away and not revisit in our own lives, right? So it's like for better or for worse. But Ana, please
take it over.
Yeah, take it over.
Hi. I am so excited to be here. I am a fan of the podcast, and I wrote this to you, but I want to say again, thank you for the episode on sexual abuse. I thought I was informed, but this helped even more. I'm already implementing things with my son, and it's fantastic. It's so useful to us moms. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for saying that.
And I love hearing how quickly you're able to implement things. I think that is one thing that we really strive to do here when we have these conversations, either when it's just us or interviewing other people, is how can we invite our listeners to take what they're hearing in these episodes and use them immediately. Right.
But that's because you make it so tangible. You're not theorizing on things. It's not some complicated theories out there. It really feels very natural, organic, and tangible. So we listeners will listen, and we know what to do. It's very organic and instinctive.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
Yes, that's so good. So tell us about you.
I am a book author and a journalist turned podcaster. In 2020, in the middle of the lockdown, homeschooling my son, I launched my podcast, which was many years in planning and wishing to do one day. And then I was ready a week before the pandemic struck. And the question was, do I do this now or not? Do I launch or not? I was ready. But I decided that exactly at that time, people were ready for something positive, something that would take their minds off the pandemic. And it turned out that it was a good decision. It was a great lesson to just go ahead. When you see a challenge like that, it's like, oh, what do I do? Do it.
You told us a really interesting story before we started recording about why you decided to start this podcast. Will you tell our listeners about that impetus, that initiative?
I love this story. I had an amazing mom. We had a beautiful, beautiful relationship. I'm an only child, and we were very, very close. It was by far not a perfect relationship, and she was not a perfect mom. There were many things she could have done differently, but she gave me what's most important, all of her love and support. So we were close, and in 2016, she was diagnosed with lung cancer, which was a big surprise because she was always extremely, extremely healthy and youthful, and nobody would ever think something is wrong. And within 6 weeks of her diagnosis, she passed away, which was very surprising. It was very fast. And coping with my grief, very soon after she passed away, I had an anxiety attack that I was going to forget everything she taught me and told me and showed me. My mom was an amazing woman because she was very true to herself. She had 2 very successful careers. She was an award-winning actress, film actress, but also an award-winning artist, working in many different fields. She was a feminist, she was an activist, and really a game changer. And nowadays I still meet women back home in Croatia, young women who tell me, your mom is my idol. Wow. And I say, yeah. And I'm like, you know what? She was my idol too. How amazing is it when your mom is your idol and idol to other young women? So when I lost her, this fear came of, I'll forget all of this. She gave me so much. She taught me so much. And if I forget what she taught me, I will forget her and lose her. So I sat down and started maniacally writing, first things she would tell me. And then that turns into things she taught me and things she modeled to me. And that turned into a book about her and her life through her lessons. So while I was working on this and telling my friends what I'm working on, women's reaction was beautiful. Women immediately started thinking about what they learned from their moms. And it became very obvious to me that this is such an obvious and such an important topic. But for some strange reason, we never think about it, especially not while our mothers are still alive. And this is where the idea for the podcast happened. Now, because I'm very international, I am originally from Croatia, and I lived during the war in Croatia. In the 90s, I escaped to Austria and then built a life in Austria. And then I fell in love with my husband, who's half British, half American. So I moved to the States where my son was born. We lived there for 10 years. Now we're back in Europe. So I went to an international school, here in Vienna. Because of that, but also because my mom was always teaching me that you need to have a big picture. Whenever I would write my articles for newspapers or my books, she would always remind me, you need many different angles, views, dimensions for this to be valuable.
Oh my God, I love that. I just want you to say it one more time, like, you need to have a big picture.
You need to have a big picture.
Oh, I love your mom.
I'll never forget, I was writing, when I lived in LA, I wrote a story about fancy artisan coffee places. And then I went into all these most expensive coffees and where the most expensive coffee in the world comes from and, things like that. And mom read the first draft and she said, she was my best editor. And she read it. She's like, this is brilliant. It's fantastic, but it's missing something. I'm like, what is it? She's like, it's missing all the farmers, in third world countries who are growing this coffee. And she would always do something like that. She would always make sure that I cover a big picture and always remind me, it's not, your thoughts are not, it all doesn't have so much value if it's seen through a very, very family vision. So this is why from the beginning on, I knew that if I do this, I want to do it properly and cover mothers and motherhood and women's lives literally globally and cover the world.
It's just amazing.
Oh my God. I actually, as we're speaking, I'm like, I want to write down everything my mother taught me. Because my mother's still alive and she's my idol. And you're so inspiring me right now. I literally am going to leave this podcast and go sit by the river and write.
Well, you better get ready because when you come as guests on my podcast, I hope you will share some of these lessons with my listeners.
My mom passed away 7 years ago, so just a little bit before yours. And she had early Alzheimer's when she died, and then she died suddenly. But it's interesting as I'm watching myself think, as you're talking about this, it's sort of like my mom's capacity to remember what she had taught me throughout her life went away as her memory went away, as her brain changed. And it's really useful to, I think both Deb and I, this is our favorite part of interviewing people is we're like, wow, I hadn't thought about that. Like that comes up for us all the time. Yeah. But it's sort of like the end of my mom's life was so plagued by pain for me that I want to go back and write those things down just as part, grief. I'm sure, when your mom passes away, it's so disorienting that the waves of grief come in different ways, even 6-7 years after they've passed away. But this is such a good exercise, I think.
It is.
For anybody.
Yeah. Anybody. And I started last summer, creative writing workshops because I am a writer by profession. On this topic, thank you, Mama, writing workshops here in Vienna. And we sit down and write about this and discuss it in the group. So we go step by step and write about our mothers' lives and then about their lessons and what we wish they taught us and what's still missing. I'm always, when I'm doing this in person with my ladies in the workshop, one of the most important topics is how can we mother ourselves? What is still missing? What do I want to keep from what my mom had taught me? What do I want to dismiss? And what is still missing, and how can I give it to myself? So what's interesting talking about grief is how helpful this process is. But the women come out of these workshops, and I have two fans who are still, it's been a year and something, and every few months they write me emails. They're like, this has changed my life, starting to think and write about this. It's important. We have to accept and understand where we come from in order to heal and feel whole, and our mothers is such a big part of that.
That's right. I run these mother-daughter workshops, and did you freeze?
No.
Okay. And I have circles of moms, and one of the first questions I ask is, what are the early messages we receive from our mothers, and what are the prerequisites of our own worthiness that we receive from, so that we can own that, really honor it, understand that it's generational, passed down, that we are absorbing so many things that are, we are living so many things that are not just ours, right?
Exactly.
And to your point, then when we start to have a relationship with it, we get to actually have agency of what we want to bring into this relationship.
Exactly. And for this, this is why I always ask my guests first and foremost to talk about their mother's lives, because I think it's very important we understand where our mothers come from.
Yes.
And then it's easy to judge, it's so easy to judge. And we need to understand where it all comes from, and it puts everything into perspective.
Ana, before we dive into some of the really beautiful insights that you're going to share with us that you've learned from all these mothers that you've interviewed around the world, you had an incredible statistic that you shared with us before we hit record about how many interviews you've done and how many different countries these interviews, the women in these interviews have come from. Can you share that with our listeners? Because talk about big picture. That just realizes the beautiful narratives you're going to share with us.
For me, the statistics are great, but when you start, when I start listing the countries, it's even more exciting. Yes. So I've published, I think, 118 episodes at this moment. I have recorded 100, at least, I think 130 in total. And I have women from 60 different countries. And maybe it doesn't sound that big, but when you think about the fact that there are 140 countries, approximately, maybe 142, I forgot, registered with United Nations as countries. And when you think about the fact that there are many countries that overlap in their culture, some of them are in Africa, for instance, which has, I forgot, 30 something or even more. 60 countries is a lot. Yeah. So, I have women from Nepal, from Burma, from Tanzania, from Sri Lanka, from you name it, I have it. And that's really, really beautiful. This is what, as we spoke before we press record, this is what I dreamt this podcast will become one day, really a global platform, and it has become at this stage.
Amazing. And will you tell us how it got its name?
The cute story. So I had a list of names, and then I did a little market research with my friends, and everybody very quickly chose Mama Said. Everybody thought Mama Said was just the best name, and that was it. And I already designed it, and I already decided on Mama Said, but somehow it did not sit with me. So I took my three favorites, and I forgot the third, but I took my three favorites and asked my son, who was 4 or 5 back then. And I said, Kai, would you help me choose a name? And I gave him these names and told him what the podcast is about. And he immediately said, thank you, Mama. And he said it with so much assurance that I had to ask, why are you so sure? Why do you feel so strongly about this? And I'll never forget the little voice who said, because it's so full of emotion. So Kai named the podcast. I couldn't say no. Who can say no to that?
No, of course.
It's the ultimate truth, Why do we?
It's also what we need to hear all the time, just to make it totally blunt. Like, yeah, we need to hear that thank you. We don't always hear the thank you.
It's so true.
So,
it's true.
The thank you goes a long way. Yeah.
Will you take us into some of your narrative, some of the information you've learned? And I know that you could go a million different directions. I would love for you to just share some of your favorite points of, what you have learned from these women that you've interviewed.
My absolutely favorite point, which is something we do not discuss in the interviews, but something I took for myself out of all of these interviews, is that, and I know it sounds kitschy. I don't like it that it sounds kitschy, but I don't know how to put it in a different way. But we are one. We are one. And what's fascinating to me, and it took me quite many interviews, very different interviews, to understand this and feel this, is that women's lives go through this certain similar route, and there is a similar pattern, which is disguised. We don't see it at first because it's disguised by the outside things. Of course, women from Kenya, farmers in Kenya, live a much poorer life. I even heard stories about witch hunt. Sorry. But when you remove these outside things, you see how women's lives go through very similar phases and patterns, and how we are all facing very similar challenges, even though they happen in different circumstances. I'm sorry, I have a little problem with my throat.
That's good. We're real here. We show up uncut here on Motherhood Uncut. So
this was for me really eye-opening. And it made me feel what I think my mother has always felt. She was a very big feminist, is that we are a sisterhood, all over the world. We are more connected through our experience, life experience, and experience of being a woman than men are through the experience of being a man, because it's so specific, being a woman's life. And it makes me a little sad that we're not more aware of that. I wish, now that I learned and saw all of this and witnessed it, I wish we were more aware of this and felt this bond and this immense power that we have as women. I wish we felt it stronger.
I agree.
Yeah.
You say that the women in general go through a similar pattern in their lives. Can you say more about that? What is the pattern that you have recognized through all of these interviews?
What's really interesting, it always starts with some form or other of emancipating ourselves and finding the real us, and finding the strength in us. No matter the circumstances, but of course, some circumstances are harder. I had stories about moms from rural Turkey who weren't allowed to go to school, for instance. So it always starts with this positioning ourselves as women and as valuable members of society, in any kind of society. And then it goes through figuring out this thing about husbands and families and children and motherhood. And then it enters caring for others. There's always this phase in our lives where we care for others. We be it our children, our spouses, our parents, care for others. And then this beautiful second stage or third act which I hear from many of my guests. I hear my mom has never been as happy. I hear this amazing, and this is one of the most important lessons. This is on my list of one of the most important lessons. That it's never too late, and that women are often, once they've done it all, they enter often this phase of being very this happy third act, which is very, very empowering.
I have a sort of a specific question for you, and I don't think it's going to take us too off track, but one of the things that Deb and I talk so much about in our own individual work, but also in our podcast, is the way in which women are raised by their own mothers or society or culture to take care, as you said, to sort of project attention and energy outward, and how problematic that can be for our health and wellness, whether it's mental or physical health and wellness. And I guess I'm curious, in your conversations, how has that question come up, as far as the question being, what would it be like for you, mother, woman, to turn the focus back on yourself so that you can care for yourself enough to care for all of these other people that you're tending to? Is that a topic that's come up for you? And what have you learned from women all around the world with respect to this?
This is one of the most important lessons that I have on my list that I'd like to share with you about, of the most important lessons that mothers around the world teach their daughters. One of them, it's interesting. One of them is kindness. Many women mention kindness, and this kindness is tricky, because kindness is kindness and helping those in need and taking care of those in need, but also tends for us women to border on self-sacrifice.
Yes.
You know, and it's very, I had this discussion with my husband. I personally think, looking at my mom and me and listening to all these interviews, I think it's not only what we learn from our mothers. I think this is something innate. It's something that is biological. Women are nurturers, and we tend to feel responsible for the well-being of everybody and everything. I became the mom of my son's hamster somehow around us. And women in my interviews talk about this often, especially about their moms and these older generations. And they mentioned one of the interview before the last, the lady said something in the sense of watching my mom always take care of others. She never learned to prioritize herself.
Yes.
And then I always ask my guests at the end of the interview, which turned out to be a super important question. What do you wish your mom had taught you? What is something that's missing, something you had to learn yourself? And one of the top things that come first is self-care. Mm. So women do talk a lot about this duality of being kind and caring of others, which we have biological in ourselves, but also learn from our mothers. And I'm sorry, but I think we're really, through generations and thousands of years, we just taught our environment to expect this. This is how we are treated, as mom is going to take care of it. And this need that we have, the new generations have recognized to step on a break and sometimes take care of ourselves. And my guests often say, I wish my mom modeled for me what self-care means.
Yes.
Very rarely, I think in the last interview, my guest said, my mom knew how to take a break. She would finish lunch or do stuff, and then she would say, no, I'm going to lie down for 20 minutes. And she would just lie down and take, it's also interesting to learn that it doesn't have to be some big things. You don't need to go to a yoga class and, meditate for 5 hours. It's just these little breaks where mom says, you know what? I'll just go for a little walk for 5 minutes. We have to model that to our daughters.
I couldn't agree more. I think that you're talking about this biological instinct around, caretaking. I also think it's some pretty intense patriarchal systemic sex that is like deeply ingrained in women to caretake, but also it silences us. And there's also this messaging of big emotions are, bad, right? For women to have big feelings, big emotions. So then when we bring it into the mother-child or mother-daughter relationship, there almost becomes this competition of who gets to have a bigger voice. And I think that's why big emotions can sometimes be really intimidating or threatening for someone, a mother that didn't get to have that. And it actually, when you're talking about self-care, it makes me think so much about when a woman really embodies and models it, and a child learns how to do that for themselves, there's not a competition there around who's going to care for themselves. There's enough room for everyone to care for themselves, right? So that's just, and the other thing I was thinking is when you were saying this, that you wish people could see the bond more, and it's such a conflict of the cultural messaging of inadequacy and competition between women, that is the ultimate conflict, I think, of how we see women in general, and to lean in towards bond.
Wait, the conflict being what?
That we are deeply messaged inadequacy and competition. Fit in and better.
Not only that, but I think that what makes us women, or this female energy, this nurturing, taking care, cooperating, creating without destroying. All of this has been silenced for thousands of years. I just returned from a trip in Greece. We went all around Greece and looked at the ancient sites, and it was really said to me. You learn it in school and you know it, but once you're there and learn how women in Greece were secondhand citizens, because everything, the Greek art, this ancient Greek art is so full of women, and they have these female goddesses. So you think, but no, women were secondhand citizens. It's so old in all cultures, not only our European culture. I think that we are this something that we could bond through has been silenced. We were supposed to be embarrassed. It didn't matter. It didn't have any value, and it was supposed to be silenced and hidden. And I'm very, very hopeful that the world is changing, and that it will become more female in its philosophy and values, and that this will help women to bond better as well through projects like you are doing and I'm doing. To recognize this beautiful bond and sisterhood, and inspire and empower each other. It sounds like again something we hear so often, but it's true.
Yes.
Ana, can you share with us some insight you've learned about a piece of feedback or a comment that I have heard often in my work, which is this idea that self-care is a privilege, that the capacity, I think that term self-care has gotten really a commercial.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
And I think there is sort of a sense I've gotten in some of the larger conversations I've had about how it can feel sort of dismissive or condescending to be using that term, because there's this idea of like, with what time? I have no resources. I have no support. How can I engage in this idea of taking care of myself? I want to turn that on its head, because I think you mentioned something earlier about how it's the little things. It is not the big
Exactly.
There are some stories or insight or things that you've learned about what quote unquote self-care or caring for ourselves can look like in these other parts of the world.
One of my this interview is not published yet. I have a beautiful interview with a lady who is a nutritional biologist, and she is from India, and she has a cookbook about introducing spices to her children. to kids, which is super interesting. So I spoke to her, and she inspired me because I just talked to her a few days ago, and she told me about her mom. She's one of these rare guests who say, my mom taught me self-care, and we started talking about this. And I agree with you. Unfortunately, self-care got so tainted with going to yoga classes and Tracy Anderson and having your nails done and going to a spa and all of these things. And it's not good because it does feel privileged. It shouldn't. And she said, my mom would do everything and prepare everything. And as I just mentioned, she would say, I need 15 minutes to lie down. And then mom would go to her room and close the door and lie down. And that was just the most normal, accepted thing. Or mom goes for walks. Still, mom is in her 80s now. Every single day she goes for these big walks. After she's done with all the work and everything in early evening, she just leaves the house and goes for a walk by herself to put her thoughts together and exercise. And one of my first interviews is also a mom from India, and her mom always meditated. So it doesn't have to be privileged. This mom is a Buddhist, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and she's meditated her whole life. And she also still exercises she must be in her 90s already. And she does these little exercises every day, like few minutes. She meditates and does a few of these exercises, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. I think we all have to, I think it's more the attitude than it is what you do.
Totally.
With your self-care. Even if you decide, I don't know, for me, sometimes self-care is reading my gossip magazines, whatever you decide that will help you center and recharge and rejuvenate. It doesn't have to be big things. And for me personally, these big things even drain more energy out of me. If I have to go to a spa, it's a big project. But a little 5-minute walk is,
What I hear you saying is that there is a common capacity to make room for ourselves in our lives, regardless of where we live or what our resources are, what's happening in our external environment.
Exactly.
That is,
And what I think what really matters again is the attitude. It's not what we do. It's this attitude of, I need this. I need this, whatever it is. Even if it's, I don't know, whatever it is, a cup of tea. Mom needs this, and I'm going to give this to myself. And you guys just put on pause for this few minutes. I think it's the attitude.
A theme I see from moms a lot is holding in your pee. It is the simplest thing, true. But I actually want to put it out there for all mamas that are listening. Every time you stop what you're doing to go empty your bladder, give yourself a little pat on the shoulder, because we will go so long. And that, I think, it sounds so strange, but it's a self-care. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm going to listen to my body and step.
But here's a question for you guys. And, it's interesting. I had this close relationship to my mom, and now I have this podcast about women, and I'm a mother of a son. And it's interesting for me to try to implement what I'm learning with a son, because now all of these interviews made me aware of what am I modeling to my son. And I'm always thinking of his future wife. I'm like, how is what I am doing and modeling to him going to impact one or more women's lives one day? So I'm trying to teach him to treat women, I'm trying to make him understand or see that women need these things. And this is the most. So my question for you is, do you think self-care is, for instance, telling your husband, today you are emptying the dishwasher? Or, I've done this and that, you empty the dishwasher, or tomorrow you are bringing the car to the service, or, maybe this is also self-care. What do you think?
100%. I mean, my favorite things in our house, and we have older girls right now, is I'm like, oh, your turn.
Yeah, your turn. That's self-care.
It's like matter of fact. Yes.
That's self-care. I'm teaching Kai to roll his socks and put his laundry in the, and for me, this is self-care. And sometimes it feels terrible because of course he doesn't want to do it, but I'm like, no, he needs to learn it now. He's 8 and he should.
I would add a little missing piece to that for me for me, the self-care isn't necessarily saying you will empty the dishwasher today. It's me saying, I will not
do this. Yes, I agree with you.
That's the self-care is like choosing what I am and I'm not willing to do.
Yes.
Because I think that is, you said something a moment ago that made me think of this. I think as women, we tend to have a hard time receiving.
Exactly.
Right? Give and give and give, but we don't always receive. And to me, that statement, I am not going to empty the dishwasher today. I am going to take myself on a walk instead of emptying the dishwasher is a way of saying, back to our general point, I'm going to receive myself. It's less about giving directions.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's taking space.
Well, and it's modeling.
And it's modeling.
And it's modeling. More to witnessing someone doing something than being told what to do.
That's right.
Yeah. My favorite little self-care is my husband sometimes texts me, or calls me, have you had any thoughts about dinner tonight? And the self-care moment is like, you know what? No, I didn't. Did you?
So our time is going so quickly.
Oh my God, we didn't even share the lesson.
Well, actually, will you take we're going to stop interrupting you and you share with us one of your most powerful lessons or stories, whatever feels the most important to you right now.
Oh, I want to share so much. Both lessons and stories, but let's start with lessons because I think it can be inspiring for your listeners. So, what the most, when I ask women the most important things, and now again these are women from all over the world, it's interesting. One of the first things they say is resilience. I don't know if we women are aware without hearing that how resilient we are. I wish we knew this better, how our daughters see us, because women talk about their mothers' lives and challenges and say that they learn resilience from their moms. Another thing they learn is hard work. And what really where the light went on for me is one of my guests said, I learned from my mom that hard work is an act of feminism. Mm-hmm. How interesting is that? Resilience and hard work. And as one of my guests said, also hard work as an important way for feeling, oh my God, I'm missing the word, self-confident. Mm-hmm. Another interesting thing, and this is something that mothers very consciously try to teach their daughters, no matter where in the world and what kind of circumstances they lived in, is to be independent. Mothers really want to teach their daughters to be independent, to get their education, to have a profession, to be financially, practically, emotionally, just be independent. And just recently, I noticed patterns in my circle of friends and with myself and with some of my guests, how unfortunate it is that sometimes this independence skips generations. Mm. And I had a very interesting conversation with an American author, Ruth Nolan, one of maybe the last episode. And I asked her this because she had a mom who was a stay-at-home mom and very, very dependent on her husband. And then Ruth was completely independent. She said, nobody ever paid my bills in my life and nobody ever will. But now her daughter is married with children and dependent on the husband. So we talked about why independence sometimes skips generations. It's a very interesting thing. And Ruth said, because I saw what it means to be dependent on a husband. I saw witnessed my mom and how she didn't ever say and what it means. So of course I did everything to be independent. My daughter saw how hard I worked and how difficult it was to be independent. And maybe she thinks, I can allow myself a little. That's an interesting food for thought.
Yes, it is.
Definitely.
Really.
Mothers often teach their daughters to accept how unique they are. And this is beautiful. Mothers tell their daughters, do not compare yourself with others. You are unique. Find that what you are, that unique something, and cherish that and develop that and rely on that and accept it. What else? We talked about kindness and love and taking care of others, which can be a double-edged sword. And here comes one of my favorite lessons, which I learned from my mom as well, but I heard it so often. It's never too late.
Yes.
Never too late. And mothers do not teach this in words or intentionally, but women witness this. And that's beautiful to see. And here come some anecdotes. You asked for stories. I had a guest from China. Her mom was worked in a factory sewing baby clothes her whole life, which you can imagine how hard it is. But then she was 55 when she decided she's going to open her own store for baby clothes. And to do this, she did it. And to do this, she had to travel, I think once a week, she had to take a night bus and travel to the next big city to get things from there. And she would travel for like 12 hours on the bus every week and come back with this new supply and things at 50 something, and she made herself independent and fulfilled her dream of being a business owner. And I had another beautiful story of an American mom who was always a stay-at-home mom, and the dad passed away very surprisingly. The mom was already mid-60s, and she decided the dad was running a very successful business. And the mom is like, I'm just going to take over. And she learned in her 60s how to run a business. Amazing. And she became the CEO of this business. So these stories of it's never too late. And then I hear often about divorces, which are so painful, but how women recuperate and come back to their happiness and to their real selves. And I hear so often, my mom was never happier than now, and that's very, very beautiful. Now I have to look into my hard work.
Can I pause you for just a moment?
Yes.
I want to give a little shout out to my mother-in-law, because you're just making me think of her. She lives in Ohio, and she is mid-70s, and her husband, my father-in-law, is not able or interested to do travel right now. And my mother-in-law loves travel and exploring herself in the world. And she's an artist, and she is taking off on all of these trips all by herself. And
I love it.
Amazing. And so
we love you, Stacey.
We love you, Stacey. A little shout out to Stacey.
Hi, Stacey.
You're making me think of her. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
It's never too late.
It's never too late. That was my
point. Never too late. It's never too late. And it's never too late to start anew, to do what you always wanted, or just simply to be happy. To be happy. It's never too late. This is, and I've learned this from my mom. My mom reinvented herself in her 60s as well, and went back into limelight. She made her own first movie. She became a movie maker after she was an actress for so long, after a long break. And this movie started winning awards, and she started traveling to international film festivals. And suddenly in her mid-60s, she was standing in limelight again. And she said in all these last interviews, she said, I've never been happier than now. And it was true. She was never happier than in her 60s, really. But anyway, and then as I mentioned, I always ask women, and another important thing is faith. And faith in any shape or form. Women very often mention how that influenced them and how important it is to them, even if they're not practicing the same faith. Just seeing and witnessing this faith into something that's bigger than us, and knowing that we are safe and guided and feeling protected. I think that's what it's about. And then when asking what women wish, and this is so important, what women wish they learned, here comes self-confidence, which is kind of, many women mention as something their mothers tried teaching them. And women really appreciate this. We have to do this for our children. This is something they always put as number one. Is my mother told me, you just have to believe in yourself and you can do it, and nothing stands in your way except you yourself, and you are amazing. This building confidence. But then it's interesting, it also slips to the list of something I wish I learned, because they also say, but you can't learn self-confidence from others. It's interesting, as something we appreciate to hear from our moms, but it's also not teachable in that way. Sex and our bodies. As one of my first guests said, if my mom taught me, I wouldn't have to go through so much painful trial and error. And this is so true. And women said, I understand that my mom didn't know it herself, that maybe she was embarrassed, that maybe she just, this wasn't a topic she felt comfortable with. But if she only gave me, I have no idea, a book, a brochure, if she only told me where to get my information, that would already be extremely helpful. Women feel very left alone out there with this, and our bodies and accepting our bodies. I think that comes hand in hand, accepting our bodies the way they are. Self-care, which we also talked about, so important. Let's model this to our children. I think these are the most important topics women talk about.
That is an incredible list. And it is that just keeps on happening. So it's so validating to hear you speak about it from all over the world.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just bringing me back to this place of trust, that these are all very like tangible, doable, benchmarks or goals or whatever we want to call them, of things to kind of do, to practice, to connect with others, to model, to teach, all of those things. It's right there. It's an incredible list.
Anna, I am so excited to go listen to your podcast, because one of the things that you're sort of tying it all together in this neat little bow. And of course, I'm imagining that someone in Tanzania or China or India or somewhere in Europe, wherever it is, could be talking about the same themes that I think about and talk about in my own little bubble here, but would talk about it in such little nuanced ways based on that person's experience and that person's culture and that person's environment, that it's almost like that's that both and. Like, we're all so interconnected. We all think about and go through the same things. And there are so many nuances that we can learn from, right? So I'm really excited to jump on your podcast and listen.
Thank you.
Tell us where our listeners can find you. Let it all hang out right here.
The podcast is called Thank You, Mama. They can find me on social media everywhere. If you look for Thank You, Mama, you will find me. My second name, there's only one Tajder in the world. This is interesting, with Tajder. So I'm sure you can put links in the episode notes. But there's one Ana Tajder out there. So, and I'm everywhere on social, and always very excited to connect. I have a website called tajder.com with all this fun information, and I'm very excited to connect.
Can I ask you two final questions? Yes,
of course.
My first question is back to this. I don't know, you could answer this two ways, but back to this idea of self-care, right? Or self-connection. What do you do? What is your practice in coming back to yourself as an author and an entrepreneur and a mother and a traveler, all these things? How do you come back to yourself, Ana?
I meditate every morning, and that's really important for me. I've been doing this for many, many years. I discovered Tai Chi in 2000, I think, and that saved my life, that practice. I used to dance ballet and do yoga until very recently, but now my orthopedic doctors say maybe I have to step on it, and that breaks my heart. But now I'm back to Tai Chi, which really, really helps. This is beautiful exercise for both body and mind. And every time I come out of the class, I'm a different person.
Oh, I can feel
I
it.
love my tea. And my tea is my little ceremony. In the morning, I drink my cup of matcha, which I prepare with a little thing. It's this little ceremony. And in the afternoon, after lunch, I always have my beautiful Earl Grey. I love buying tea, and I like enjoying tea, and I have beautiful honey that I put in there. And these are these little tiny, things that matter to me. Since I moved back to Vienna, I started doing solitaire when I have time. And sometimes I suggest my husband and my son play video games or something, and I sit down and I have real cards and I have a cup of tea, and I take these few minutes and I just play solitaire.
What image that is.
I play solitaire
You
too.
do?
Yes.
Wait, I
love
never knew that about you.
I totally play solitaire. It's like a thing.
Mothers across the world are doing the same thing.
Doesn't it feel extremely luxurious? Like, to me, I just rediscovered it. I used to do it many years, but now it just feels, this cup of tea and this solitaire, it just feels like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Ana,
And I love going for walks. I love nature, and love going for walks.
beautiful. Here's my final question for you. First of all, you're like a specialist in all these little ways of taking care of yourself. So I'm hoping some of our listeners can inherit some of those, which sort of goes to my next question. You have a son. You have a podcast called Thank You, Mama. We talk a lot about how important mama mentors are for us. What is one or two pieces of wisdom, advice that you could pass along to the women who are listening to this episode?
These are things I learned from my mom, and something I'm trying to teach my son. And if I could choose, I would teach everybody in the world to love life and to learn to appreciate life, to not take life for granted, to not take health for granted, to not take blue skies for granted, to not take having a roof over your head for granted, to really appreciate this, thankfully for us, everyday things, And I walk down the street with Kai, and I tell him, look at these beautiful flowers. Aren't these amazing? I'm trying to teach him to find enchantment and magic in just pure existence, and just the fact that we are alive, that nothing hurts, that we have food in our bellies. And, this is something I learned from my mom, and I would really like to teach him. And I think if we all learned this and practiced this more, the world would be a different place.
A beautiful way to end this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ana. This has been incredible. And keep up your amazing work in the world. You are really impacting people everywhere you go.
Agreed.
So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana.
Have a good day.
Thank you. This was so fun.
Hey, you guys, it's Kate. We really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you did, go ahead and share it with a friend. It also would mean the world to me and Deb if you would take a minute and write a review. If this podcast makes you laugh, makes you cry in the best of ways, helps you feel less alone, gives you information that's useful to you in your mothering journey, if you write a review, it will make this more accessible to other mothers like you. So take a minute. We'd be so grateful. Thanks for being here.